One Great Dane, over towards Hampstead, was particularly encouraging. "I have a chain of friends all over England," he said in his great booming bark, "and I'll be on duty day and night. Courage, courage, O dogs of Regent's Park!" It was almost dark now, and the Dearlys were suggesting, very gently, that they should be taken home. So after a few last words with the Great Dane, Pongo and Mrs. led the way down Primrose Hill. The dogs who had answered them were silent now, but the twilight barking was spreading in an ever-widening circle. And tonight it would not end with twilight. It would go on and on as the moon rose high over England. The next day a great many people who had read Mr. Dearly's advertisements rang up to sympathize. Cruella de Vil did, and seemed most upset when she was told the puppies had been stolen while she was talking to Nanny Cook. But no one had anything helpful to say, and Scotland Yard was frankly baffled. So it was another sad, sad day for the Dearlys, the nannies, and the dogs. Just before dusk, Pongo and Mrs. again showed that they wished to take the Dearlys for a walk. So off they started, and again the dogs led the way to the top of Primrose Hill. And again they stood side by side and gave 3 sharp barks. But this time, though no human ear could have detected it, they were slightly different barks, and they meant not "help, help, help," but "ready, ready, ready." The dogs who had collected news from all over London replied first. Reports had come in from the West End and the East End and the south of the Thames. All these reports were the same. "Calling Pongo and Mrs. Pongo of Regent's Park. No news of your puppies. Deepest regrets." End of message. Poor Mrs. She had hoped so much that her pups were still in London. Pongo's secret suspicion had led him to pin his hopes to news from the country, and soon as pouring in, some of it relayed across London. But it was always the same. "Calling Pongo and Mrs. Pongo of Regent's Park. No news of your puppies. Deepest regrets." End of message. Again and again Pongo and Mrs. barked the "ready" signal, each time with fresh hope. Again and again came bitter disappointment. At last only the Great Dane over towards Hampstead remained to be heard from. They signaled to him, their last hope. Back came his booming bark. "Calling Pongo and Mrs. Pongo of Regent's Park. No news of your puppies. Deepest regrets. End of—" The Great Dane stopped in mid-bark. A second later he barked again. "Wait! Wait! Wait!" Dead still, their hearts thumping, Pongo and Mrs. waited. They waited so long that Mr. Dearly put his hand on Pongo's head and said, "What about coming home, boy?" For the first time in his life, Pongo jerked his head from Mr. Dearly's hand, but went on standing stock still. And at last the Great Dane spoke again, booming triumphantly through the fast-gathering dusk. "Calling Pongo and Mrs. Pongo. News, news at last." Saying bye to received details. A most wonderful thing had happened. Just as the Great Dane had about to sign off, a Pomeranian with a piercing yap had got a message through to him. She had heard it from a poodle, who had heard it from a boxer, who had heard it from a Pekingese. Dogs of almost every known breed had helped to carry the news, and a great many dogs of unknown breed. None the worse for that, and all of them bright as buttons. In all, 480 dogs had relayed the message, which had traveled over 60 miles as a dog barks. Each dog had given the urgent signal, which had silenced all gossiping dogs. Not that many dogs were merely gossiping that night. Almost all the twilight barking had been about the missing puppies. This was a strange story that now came through to Pongo and Mrs. Some hours earlier, an elderly English sheepdog, living on a farm in a remote Suffolk village, had gone for an afternoon amble. He knew all about the missing puppies and had just been discussing them with the tabby cat at the farm. She was a great friend of his. Some little way from the village, on a lonely heath, was an old house completely surrounded by an unusually high wall. 2 brothers, named Saul and Jasper Batten, lived there, but were merely caretakers for the real owner. The place had an evil reputation. No local dog would have dreamed of putting its nose inside the tall iron gates. In any case, these gates were always kept locked. It so happened that the sheepdog's walk took him past his house. He quickened his pace, having no wish to meet either of the Battens. And at that moment, something came sailing out over the high wall. It was a bone, the sheepdog saw with pleasure, but not a bone with meat on it, he noted with disgust. It was an old, dry bone, and on it were some peculiar scratches. The scratches formed letters, and the letters were SOS. Someone was asking for help, someone behind the tall wall and the high, chained gates. The sheepdog barked a low, cautious bark. He was answered by a high, shrill bark. Then he heard a yelp, as if some dog had been cuffed. The sheepdog barked again, saying, "I'll do all I can." Then he picked up the bone in his teeth and raced back to the farm. Once home, he showed the bone to the tabby cat and asked her help. Then, together, they hurried to the lonely house. At the back they found a tree whose branches reached over the wall. The cat climbed the tree, went along its branches, and then leapt to a tree the other side of the wall. "Take care of yourself," barked the sheepdog. "Remember, those Bannon brothers are villains." The cat clawed her way down, backwards, to the ground, then hurried through the overgrown shrubbery. Soon she came to an old brick wall which enclosed the stable yard. From behind the wall came whimperings and snufflings. She leaped to the top of the wall and looked down. The next second, one of the Batten brothers saw her and threw a stone at her. She dodged it, jumped from the wall, and ran for her life. In 2 minutes, she was safely back with the sheepdog. "They're there," she said triumphantly. "The place is seething with Dalmatian puppies." The sheepdog was a formidable tonight with the most important news in dogdom to send out. He surpassed himself, and so the message traveled, by way of farm dogs and house dogs, great dogs and small dogs. Sometimes the bark would carry half a mile or more, sometimes it would need to carry only a few yards. One sharp-eared can saved the chain from breaking by picking up a bark from nearly a mile away and then almost bursting herself getting it onto the dog next door. Across miles and miles of country, across miles and miles of suburbs, across a network of London streets, the chain held firm, from the depths of Suffolk to the top of Primrose Hill, where Pongo and Mrs., still as statues, stood listening. Puppies found in lonely house. SOS on old bone. Mrs. could not take it all in, but Pongo missed nothing. There were instructions for reaching the village, suggestions for the journey, offers of hospitality on the way, and the dog's chain was standing by to take a message back to the pups. The sheepdog would bark it over the wall in the dead of night. At first, Mrs. was too excited to think of anything to say. But Pongo barked clearly, "Tell them we're coming. Tell them we start tonight. Tell them to be brave." Then Mrs. found her voice. "Give them all our love. Tell Pash to take care of Cadpig. Tell Lucky not to be too daring. Tell Roly Poly to keep out of mischief." She would have sent a message to each one of the 15 puppies. She would have sent a message to each one of the 15 pups if Pongo had not whispered, "That's enough, dear. You mustn't make it too complicated. Let the Great Dane start work now." So they signed off, and there was a sudden silence. And then, though not quite so loudly, they heard the Great Dane again. But this time he was not barking towards them. What they heard was their message, starting on its way to Suffolk.